About 15 years ago, I heard a conversation that really scared me. It was between two hugely influential public intellectuals, both Canadians. Alfred Tai-Ake, a radical First Nations activist, author, and teacher, and John Ralston Saul, another First Nations activist, author, and teacher. Both men were, and probably still are, soft-spoken, articulate, and very knowledgeable. Going into it, I was expecting a pleasant conversation between two men who shared a common goal, I thought, which was to improve the lives of Indigenous people. That was not exactly what I got. To understand what I did get, you'd need a better understanding of who the two men are. The following is a quote from the Wikipedia article devoted to John Ralston Saul. Saul argues that contemporary Canada has been deeply influenced and shaped by Aboriginal ideas and the experience of both Francophone and Anglophone immigrants over the 250 years from 1600 on, during which Aboriginals were either the dominant force in Canada or equal partners. I'm just going to add, they were equal partners in the near extinction of beaver, and that's despite their spiritual connection to nature. It's actually true. He argues that Aboriginals are making a rapid comeback and that their fundamental influence needs to be recognized in order for non-Aboriginal Canadians to understand themselves, which, of course, is a rare and amazing thing to say and not something completely lacking in merit. For evidence, he points, for example, to the gentler and less arrogant attitude of Canadians compared to the more aggressive style of Americans. He argues that we are that way because, in a sense, we are a Métis nation, at least in our origins. And of course, he thinks that's a very good conversation. It's a very good conversation. And he thinks that's a very good thing, I'm sorry. In the conversation with Alfred, John seemed truly convinced of his theory and offered it to Alfred, obviously anticipating a warm response. He was, after all, putting forward the notion that some of Canadians' best traits are due to the influence of First Nations. We are, in a sense, one. You can't get much more brotherly than that, I don't think. Alfred's response, get this, I hope that doesn't mean you think you have a right to be here. I hope that doesn't mean you think you have a right to be here. Think about that. He thinks we have no right to be in the country that our ancestors built, and which was, not so long ago, admired around the world for its enlightened political, immigration systems, thriving economy, devotion to human rights, and probably a dozen other things. In a Substack article called Translating an Indigenous Worldview for the Colonial Mind, Alfred writes, we're entirely justified to take back our land by any means necessary. Be nervous when you hear a Marxist use the phrase, by any means necessary. Anyway, he says, we're entirely justified to take back our land by any means necessary, as has been said, but it's not possible. The forces of the state and capitalism are so immense and so oriented towards disciplining anybody who steps out of line, and certainly those who challenge the state, that for our small-numbered, very poorly armed people, it's just not anything that could be seriously considered. Now here's a quote from a book called The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, who is widely considered to be the man who first introduced the world to the concept of colonization. Once their rage explodes, they recover their lost coherence. They experience self-knowledge through reconstruction of themselves. From afar, we see their war as a triumph of barbarity, but it proceeds on its own to gradually emancipate the fighter and progressively eliminates the colonial darkness inside and out. As soon as it begins, it is merciless. Either one must remain terrified or become terrifying, which means surrendering to the dissociations of a fabricated life or conquering the unity of one's native soil. When the peasants lay hands on a gun, the old myths fade, and one by one the taboos are overturned. A fighter's weapon is his humanity. For in the first phase of the revolt, killing is a necessity. Killing a European is killing two birds with one stone, eliminating in one go oppressor and oppressed, leaving one man dead and the other free. It's from Frantz Fanon, a book called The Wretched of the Earth. That is extreme language without much relevance to the situation in Canada now, when the possibility of violence is near zero. But we have had other very disruptive events, such as the blockades against CNN Rail in 2020 that inconvenienced people and caused massive numbers of people and caused massive financial problems, financial losses. And they were, by the way, a protest against the pipeline that most First Nations people wanted. My target here is radical First Nations activists. In response to the Kamloops hoax, dozens of churches were burned to the ground and dozens more were vandalized. The statue of Edgar Ryerson, the man who brought taxpayer-funded universal education to Canada, was torn down, desecrated, and decapitated in broad daylight at the university that once bore his name, I should say. They found his desecrated head mounted on a spike in Caledonia some days later. Jokes were made about taking his head on a tour around Canada. John A. Macdonald's statue was torn down as well, as statues to Queen Victoria and Regina. When John's statues came down, one of the protesters, a white guy by the way, gestured like he was defecating on his head. And the response to all of this on the part of our legal system was to deliver 0 convictions for any of this patently illegal behavior. Perhaps they bought into the notion that we have no right to be here in the first place, and therefore no right to defend ourselves against crime and insult.